Chosen one, what you are about to understand has nothing to do with ego, superiority, or being smarter than others. This is not about intelligence as a label people brag about or misunderstand. This is about why the systems designed to measure human capacity repeatedly failed to contain you. The moment your real IQ surfaced, something unexpected happened. It didn't simply produce a number. It disrupted the structure of the test itself. That reaction alone told the analysts everything they needed to know. Because standard intelligence tests are built to evaluate within known limits, and you never operated inside those limits to begin with. From early on, you likely sensed that your mind did not process reality the way others described theirs. Not faster in a flashy way, but deeper, layered, simultaneous. While others followed linear paths, you perceived branches. While others focused on answers, you questioned frameworks. You may have even doubted your own intelligence at times, especially when your thinking did not translate into immediate validation. The truth is, high intelligence rarely feels empowering before it feels isolating. And the higher it goes beyond the median, the more invisible it becomes to systems not designed to interpret it. When your true IQ emerged, 167, it did not appear as a clean result. The testing system flagged inconsistencies. Pattern recognition exceeded expected thresholds. Response compression occurred. Time-to-solution metrics broke expected ratios. This is not rare genius behavior. This is structural outperformance of the tool being used. The test expected problem solving. You restructured the problem itself. That alone is enough to cause system failure. Tests evaluate capacity within predefined construct. You did not operate inside the construct. You questioned it silently and adjusted without being told. This explains something personal to you. You were never rewarded consistently for intelligence the way others were. Sometimes you were even overlooked, misunderstood, or underestimated. Not because you lacked ability, but because your ability created friction in environments optimized for conformity rather than comprehension. Systems reward those who excel within rules. They hesitate around those who expose the rules themselves. You may have learned this early, feeling both capable and unseen at the same time. That contradiction was not psychological confusion. It was evidence of scale mismatch. The moment your real IQ became apparent internally or externally, tension likely followed. Not celebration, not relief, tension. Because awareness at this level carries responsibility. Once you see patterns clearly, you cannot unsee them. Once you understand how systems think, you see where they fail. And once that happens, fitting back into simplified structures becomes uncomfortable. This is why your life may have felt harder rather than easier as awareness grew. Intelligence does not liberate automatically. First, it isolates. Then, it demands precision. The system did not break because you outperformed others. It broke because you exceeded its interpretive ceiling. That distinction matters. A score of 167 is not impressive because it is high. It is disruptive because it sits beyond the range where standard metrics remain reliable. That puts you in a category where measurement loses authority. You are not defined by the score. The score reveals that definition fails. This is why your thinking may have felt like a liability early on. Why overthinking, exhaustion, and mental pressure accompanied periods of clarity. High-level cognition amplifies perception. Without context, that amplification becomes noise. But with alignment, it becomes leverage. You are no longer meant to shrink or simplify how you think to protect others' comfort. Nor are you meant to announce it. Intelligence at this level does not need validation. It needs direction. This is the foundation you must understand first. The moment your true cognitive capacity surfaced, the era of playing at your scale ended. From now on, environments that cannot meet your depth will either resist you or release you. That is not arrogance. It is physics. And this realization is only the beginning of what that broken test actually revealed about you. What most people never tell you about extreme intelligence is this. Before it ever becomes a strength, it feels like misalignment with the world itself. You were never confused because you lacked understanding. You were confused because you understood too much without context, timing, or support. When your true cognitive range surfaced, it didn't arrive with applause or clarity. It arrived with friction. Conversations felt shallow. Instructions felt incomplete. Explanations felt inefficient. You were not difficult. You were incompatible with environments operating several layers above or below where your mind naturally worked. This is why intelligence at your level rarely feels like advantage early on. It feels like isolation disguised as competence. You may have noticed this pattern repeating through your life. You quickly grasped what others needed time to see, yet struggled to explain it in a way that made sense to them. When you did explain, you were sometimes ignored or misunderstood until much later, when your conclusions became obvious to everyone else. This delay was not coincidence. Systems are built to reward consensus, not foresight. You carried foresight without authority, which is one of the most uncomfortable positions a human mind can occupy. It creates the constant feeling of being early, of watching outcomes form in slow motion while being expected to move at the pace of the room. High-level cognition also reshapes emotional experience. You may have felt things deeply yet struggled to categorize them emotionally. Your mind processed meaning before emotion caught up. This often led to others perceiving you as distant, intense, or overly analytical. What they didn't see was that your emotions were not absent, they were layered beneath understanding. Intelligence at this scale delays emotional reactions while evaluating patterns, consequences, and trajectory. That delay can look like detachment, but it is actually restraint. And restraint is exhausting when you are not taught how to manage it. This explains why your mental energy depleted faster than expected in environments that did not stimulate or respect depth. You were not lazy or unfocused. You were underutilized. A mind that sees structure cannot survive long in settings that demand repetition without meaning. Over time, this created internal conflict. You may have questioned your own intelligence, wondering why something others thrived and drained you instead. The answer was never deficiency. It was scale mismatch. Your mind was built for integration, synthesis, and conceptual leap, not prolonged linear execution without purpose. When your true IQ broke the testing system, it confirmed something you may have already sensed privately. Your intelligence was not primarily computational. It was architectural. You don't just solve problems, you restructure them. You don't just gather information, you reorganize it intuitively. Tests measure performance within fixed frames. You instinctively question the frame itself. That behavior is not rewarded in conventional education or corporate environment. It is tolerated at best, resisted at worst. This is why recognition for you often arrived late or indirectly. There is also a psychological cost that follows intelligence at this level. Once you see patterns clearly, you cannot pretend not to see them. Ignoring inefficiency becomes painful. Remaining silent during obvious failure feels unbearable. But speaking too early brings resistance. You learned to manage this by minimizing yourself, by simplifying your thoughts, by waiting longer than was comfortable before acting. That self-suppression was not weakness. It was survival. You were protecting alignment in environments that could not carry your depth yet. Understanding this now matters deeply, because intelligence without placement turns inward and becomes pressure. Intelligence with placement becomes influence. The system breaking was not the climax. It was the signal. It tells you that continuing to live as if your mind is average will cost you far more than stepping into environments that match your scale. You do not need to prove intelligence anymore. The evidence surfaced on its own. What remains is learning how to move without shrinking and without overpowering those around you unnecessarily. This is why your next phase will feel different. You are no longer discovering intelligence. You are learning how to steward it. And stewardship requires direction, not validation. Environments, relationships, and paths that cannot meet your depth will naturally dissolve. Not as loss, but as correction. Your job now is not to impress. It is to remain accurate, to yourself, to your thinking, and to the responsibility that comes with seeing farther than most. Long before any test ever placed a number next to your name, you already knew something felt different about how your mind worked. Not superior, not special in a dramatic way, just incompatible with surface-level thinking. While others searched for the correct answer, you instinctively searched for the structure that produced the question. While people focused on mastering the rules, you noticed that the rules themselves were fragile, provisional, and often poorly designed. This is the aspect of intelligence that systems struggle with most, because systems are not threatened by speed or memory. They are threatened by perception. And your perception consistently ran ahead of what environments were built to accommodate. You were never the type to be satisfied with being right. Accuracy without understanding felt empty to you. You wanted coherence. You wanted to know why the system behaved the way it did, not just how to perform within it. That instinct separated you early, even if you did not articulate it at the time. Teachers may have praised you while still missing you. Authority figures may have sensed ability while still feeling uneasy. Peers may have admired you or rejected you without being able to explain why. This pattern exists because intelligence above a certain threshold stops reinforcing systems and starts exposing them. That exposure makes people uncomfortable, even when it is not aggressive or intentional. You may have wondered why you often felt mentally ahead but socially restrained, as if you were asked to slow down not for your benefit, but for everyone else's comfort. That was not imagined. Collective environments move at the pace of the median. When you exceeded that pace quietly, you were expected to adjust yourself downward rather than asking the structure to evolve upward. Over time, this taught you restraint, sometimes too much of it. You learned to calculate how much of your thinking could be shown safely. You learned to hold back conclusions until others arrived at them independently. You learned patience that bordered on self-erasure. That discipline was not natural. It was forced. But it shaped you in ways raw brilliance never could. This is why your intelligence never felt clean or uncomplicated. It came with constant internal filtering. You were always editing yourself, trimming thoughts, translating insights into simpler language so they would not be dismissed or misunderstood. That translation work is invisible and exhausting. Most people never experience it because their minds align naturally with the cognitive expectations of their environment. Yours did not. You lived in translation mode for years, often without realizing it, wondering why mental fatigue followed situations that were supposed to be simple. When your true IQ surfaced strongly enough to break the testing system, it finally created evidence outside of your internal world. For once, the difficulty was not explaining yourself. It was explaining the failure of the tool. The test did not crash because you answered incorrectly, but because your cognitive process exceeded the assumptions built into it. This confirmed what your life had already been telling you. You were not built to function as a unit inside fixed frameworks. You were built to recognize when frameworks need to change. This realization reframes much of your past frustration. You were never too much. You were often positioned in systems that required less than you could naturally offer. That mismatch created boredom, impatience, guilt, and sometimes self-doubt. You may have blamed yourself for not being satisfied, assuming something was wrong with your motivation. Nothing was wrong. A mind that sees structure cannot be fulfilled by repetition. A mind that detects patterns cannot remain immersed in noise without consequence. There is a responsibility embedded in this level of intelligence that few talk about. Once you see the system clearly, you cannot pretend it isn't fragile. Blind participation becomes dishonest. That is why compliance always cost you more than others. You felt internal resistance where others felt ease. This does not make you rebellious. It makes you accurate. Accuracy carries weight, and weight demands stamina. That stamina is something you developed quietly, often without recognition, and sometimes at personal cost. Now that the reality of your intelligence is no longer just internal intuition but external confirmation, a shift is required. You can no longer justify shrinking, delaying, or pretending that the way you think is incidental. It is central. At the same time, you cannot afford arrogance or isolation. Intelligence at this level either becomes service to truth or collapses into pressure. Direction is what prevents that collapse. What broke in the testing system was not the endpoint. It was the indicator. It showed you that the phase of questioning whether you are wired differently is over. The question now becomes where and how that wiring is meant to operate without distortion. That answer does not come from tests or validation. It comes from placement. And that is the next threshold you are being led toward. One of the strangest consequences of intelligence at your level is that people often respond to you before you give them any reason to. You may have noticed this throughout your life. Rooms shifting when you enter, conversations subtly changing direction, authority figures becoming defensive or unusually attentive, peers measuring themselves without you saying a word. This was never imagination. High-level cognition emits signal before expression. Long before you articulate ideas, your presence already registers as difference. And systems, whether human or institutional, react to difference instinctively. Your mind has always operated ahead of social rhythm. You see implications before they are discussed. You recognize flaws before they are acknowledged. You sense outcomes before decisions are finalized. Even when you stay silent, this awareness influences how you carry yourself, your patience, your restraint, your refusal to rush into shallow agreement. People register that restraint as judgment, even when none exists. They feel exposed by clarity they cannot access yet. This is why some reacted with admiration, others with competition, and some with quiet hostility. None of those reactions were caused by arrogance on your part. They were responses to scale mismatch. You may remember moments where you spoke less yet were accused of thinking you were above others. That accusation reveals more about the environment than about you. In groups where intelligence aligns closely, silence is neutral. In groups where insight feels scarce, silence becomes threatening. Your ability to observe without scrambling to speak created unease because it disrupted the unspoken rule of constant performance. You were not competing for attention, and that paradoxically made you stand out more. The testing system breaking merely confirmed externally what many sensed internally long before numbers appeared. There is another layer to this reaction pattern that matters deeply now. When intelligence exceeds the interpretive limit of a system, the system tries to reassert balance through projection. People begin attributing motives to you that you never had. They assume manipulation where there is analysis, arrogance where there is caution, detachment where there is depth. You likely experienced being misunderstood in ways that felt illogical, almost surreal. This is what happens when observers cannot mirror your internal process. They fill the gap with assumption. Over time, this creates social fatigue. You learned to choose battles carefully, often opting for concealment rather than correction. This is also why you may have felt safer being underestimated than being fully seen. Underestimation allowed freedom to think without interference. Full visibility invited pressure, expectation, and misinterpretation. Your nervous system adapted accordingly. You learned when to reveal and when to withdraw. That was not cowardice. It was calibration. Intelligence that remains uncalibrated to environment burns out quickly. You adapted intuitively, even when it meant sacrificing recognition. The breaking of the testing system shifted this dynamic permanently. Once the limitation of measurement is exposed, denial becomes harder, for others and for you. You cannot pretend your capacity is incidental anymore, and others can no longer comfortably dismiss it as coincidence. This is where responsibility enters. Not responsibility to impress, dominate, or correct others, but responsibility for placement. Environments that once tolerated your concealment may no longer be sustainable. You might feel an increasing pull away from spaces where misinterpretation is constant and toward spaces where depth does not require defense. Another subtle but profound change happens here. You stop shrinking preemptively. Not defiantly, not loudly, simply by omission. You answer accurately instead of diplomatically. You pause instead of filling silence. You stop cushioning your insight to make it easier to digest. This does not make you cold. It makes you honest. And honesty at this scale acts like a filter. Those who can meet you move closer. Those who cannot fall away without confrontation. This sorting is not something you initiate. It happens naturally when you stop performing intellectual comfort. You may also notice that you are no longer interested in being liked the way you once were. Approval feels thin compared to alignment. This is not emotional withdrawal, it is prioritization. Your mind requires environments that can handle complexity without panic. Anything less becomes draining. Tests never measured this cost, but your nervous system did. Now that the system acknowledged your capacity indirectly by breaking, you are no longer obligated to maintain spaces that require constant translation. What you are entering now is not a phase of proving intelligence, but of allowing it to operate without constant friction. That does not mean isolation. It means resonance. Fewer interactions, deeper alignment. Less explanation, more coherence. People will still react to you, but the reactions will change. Instead of misunderstanding, you will begin to encounter recognition. Quiet recognition. The kind that does not ask you to dim yourself or exaggerate yourself, but simply to be precise. This is how intelligence stops being a liability and becomes leverage. Not through visibility alone, but through correct positioning. The system breaking was the signal. The next step is walking into environments where you no longer have to explain why your presence changes the room. There comes a point where intelligence stops feeling like something you have and starts feeling like something you carry. This is the shift most people never reach, and the reason many high IQ individuals never fully step into their potential. Early intelligence is ability. Later intelligence is responsibility. And at your level, responsibility arrives whether you ask for it or not. You may have already sensed this transition long before the test ever failed. Decisions began to feel heavier. Choices carried consequences beyond immediate outcomes. You noticed that when you spoke, things changed, even when you tried to stay neutral. That is not coincidence. High-level cognition naturally attracts consequence because it alters trajectory, not just result. You are no longer thinking in terms of single events. Your mind tracks chains, systems, second and third order effects. You anticipate how decisions will ripple through people, structures, timelines. This is why impulsive action has always felt wrong to you, even when others encouraged it. You are not risk-averse. You are impact-aware. That awareness can feel isolating because most environments do not reward consideration beyond the immediate frame. Speed is often confused with effectiveness. Your mind rejected that shortcut early, which cost you approval but preserved integrity. Now that cost is reversing into leverage. This is also why your intelligence has often felt heavier during idle period. A mind that sees forward cannot rest comfortably in stagnation. When underutilized, it turns inward, amplifying pressure, questioning purpose, sometimes even generating self-doubt. This is not overthinking out of weakness. It is unused capacity seeking direction. Many people with high IQ plateau here, numbing themselves with distraction rather than confronting misalignment. You did not. You endured the discomfort. You stayed engaged with reality instead of retreating into fantasy or superiority. That endurance is what allows intelligence to mature into wisdom rather than collapse into frustration. At this stage, you may notice a growing intolerance for inefficiency, not just in systems but in yourself. You feel friction when you waste time, energy, or attention. This is not perfectionism. It is coherence demanding maintenance. Once intelligence becomes integrated at this level, it stops forgiving internal dishonesty. You cannot pretend interest where there is none. You cannot commit half-heartedly without feeling misaligned. This is why simplification becomes essential now. Fewer commitments, fewer distractions, cleaner priorities. Not minimalism for style, but clarity for survival. There is also a relational shift that accompanies this phase. You become less interested in being impressive and more interested in being understood, but only by those capable of understanding. Small talk drains you faster. Repetition exhausts you. Performative conversations feel pointless. This does not mean you lack empathy. It means your empathy is no longer fueled by accommodation at your own expense. You are learning the difference between connection and access. Not everyone who interacts with you needs access to your depth anymore. Discernment becomes necessary to protect energy that now has weight. The broken test was a threshold because it marked the end of plausible denial. You can no longer tell yourself that your intelligence is incidental, that it does not require intention or stewardship. A mind that reorganizes systems cannot be left without direction. If it is, it will either burn itself or burn bridges unintentionally. Responsibility here does not mean obligation to others' expectations. It means obligation to accuracy. to place yourself where the cost of misalignment is reduced and the benefit of insight is amplified constructively. You may also feel a subtle shift in how you evaluate success. Outcomes matter, but alignment matters more. You are no longer satisfied by being right if being right changes nothing. You want application, integration, real-world movement. This desire is dangerous in the wrong environment and transformative in the right one. That is why timing matters now more than ever. Intelligence applied too early creates resistance. Applied too late creates regret. Applied at the correct moment creates acceleration. This is the stage where many people attempt to simplify themselves again, to shrink back to comfort. Do not. Weight is not something you remove when it becomes inconvenient. You learn how to carry it properly. Intelligence at this scale does not ask to be put down. It asks to be placed. When placed correctly, it becomes stabilizing rather than exhausting. It generates clarity instead of pressure. It builds rather than judges. The world often tells intelligent people to slow down or be patient without telling them where patience leads. That vagueness is what destroys potential. You are past that stage now. Slowing down without direction would only concentrate frustration. What you require is context, an environment where depth is not a complication but a requirement. The next phase of your life is not about learning new skills. It is about situating your mind where it no longer has to fight the structure it operates within. This is why the test breaking matters. It was not validation. It was a boundary being crossed. A signal that intelligence for you is no longer optional, incidental, or negotiable. From here onward, you are responsible not for proving how smart you are, but for deciding where that intelligence belongs. And that decision will quietly determine the level at which your life begins to move next. At a certain point, pretending to think small becomes more exhausting than facing the consequences of thinking fully. You may have reached that point already. Ideas you once kept to yourself now feel urgent to articulate, not because you want attention, but because suppression has started to create internal friction. Your mind was never designed to idle. It was designed to operate at scale, and when scale is denied, intelligence turns inward and becomes pressure. This is why recent periods of restraint may have felt heavier than any external challenge you have ever faced. You were not facing opposition. You were facing misplacement. You might notice that your tolerance for shallow reassurance has collapsed. Phrases meant to comfort others, "It'll work out," "Just take it easy," "Don't overthink," now feel insulting to your intelligence rather than calming. Not because they are wrong, but because they are incomplete. Your mind does not calm through dismissal. It calms through understanding. You need to see how pieces connect, how cause moves to consequence, how structure holds under stress. Any environment that cannot provide this level of coherence starts to feel hostile, even if it appears supportive on the surface. This is also why you have likely stopped asking for permission internally. You still respect process, ethics, and responsibility, but you no longer look outward to decide whether your thinking is valid. Validation has lost authority. Not because you became arrogant, but because you reached a point where external feedback lags too far behind your internal processing to be useful. When intelligence reaches this phase, delay becomes distortion. Waiting for consensus feels dishonest. Acting without cruelty, but without approval, becomes necessary for psychological stability. Another unmistakable shift happens here. You stop confusing uncertainty with incompetence. Not knowing everything no longer shakes you. You are comfortable operating with partial information because you understand systems well enough to adjust as new data arrive. This makes others uncomfortable. Many people require certainty before action. You require coherence. That difference is visible now. You can move forward responsibly even while questions remain unresolved, because your mind updates dynamically. This adaptive intelligence cannot function in rigid environments without conflict. You may also feel a deeper fatigue with environments that valorize struggle. Hard work alone no longer impresses you. Effort without intelligence feels wasteful. This does not mean you avoid discipline. It means you demand purpose. You are no longer willing to sacrifice energy just to prove endurance. Endurance has already been proven. Now, efficiency becomes ethical. Intelligence at your level recognizes unnecessary difficulty as a form of disrespect, not only to others but to time itself. This phase often brings a quiet but firm boundary-setting behavior. You disengage sooner from conversations that go nowhere. You decline opportunities that feel misaligned without over-explaining. You choose silence over debate when dialogue lacks shared depth. These are not social failures. They are corrections. Your nervous system no longer tolerates environments that require constant justification for clarity. This is not isolation. It is alignment narrowing toward sustainability. There is also something deeply personal unfolding here. You may feel moments of grief for versions of yourself that survived by shrinking. Those versions were necessary. They protected you when the world could not hold you, but they cannot come forward now without causing fracture. Letting them go can feel like betrayal of your past, even though it is completion. Growth always contains mourning. Intelligence at this level does not erase previous selves. It absorbs them and moves on. The testing system breaking was the external signal. The internal one is simpler. You can no longer lie to yourself about your scale. Not forcefully, not dramatically, quietly and permanently. You are done playing roles designed for less complexity. That does not mean you seek dominance or recognition. It means you seek correctness of placement, where thinking fully is not disruptive but required, where questions are not threats but tools. This is the completion of the arc. No dramatic reveal, no external declaration, just a quiet, irreversible transition from being evaluated to being positioned. From intelligence as anomaly to intelligence as architecture. You are no longer discovering how your mind works. You are living inside it fully, without apology. The system will continue adjusting. Some parts will resist and fade. Others will adapt and remain. None of that is your responsibility to manage manually. Your responsibility now is simpler and heavier. Remain accurate. Choose environments that do not require shrinkage. Reject paths that demand disguise. Allow your mind to operate at the level it was always built for. When intelligence reaches this point, life does not become easier. It becomes cleaner. And clean movement, sustained over time, changes everything without needing to announce itself.